Okay, let me share the screen. All right, are you seeing this?
Yep.
And there's some stuff at the top, but I'm going to leave that there for now because I think when I make it full screen, we run into some issues. Okay, do you see this 15 seconds?
Yep.
All right. Hey everyone, we're back after a little technical snafu. So as I mentioned, today we're going to talk about real hourly wage, right? You've already prepared your pen and paper and you're ready to engage. And we've talked about a couple questions that I had for the group, one of which was, do you know how many hours a week you work, right? And most of you said yes or sort of, right? Do you know your hourly income? Most of you, this was more of a mix. And then when we asked, do you feel like you're paid fairly? Pretty much all of you said no. Do you see this pulse check 3 out of 3 slide? Okay, great. And so the reality that I was attempting to demonstrate was that I have some news, and you're probably working more than you think you are, and you're probably getting paid less too. And that's because of this concept of the real hourly wage, right? Which is an idea that I first came across in the book Your Money or Your Life. And this is what we're going to talk about. These are the three questions that I mentioned earlier. This is the agenda for today. What is a real hourly wage? What's your own real hourly wage? And what can you do about it? What are the real world implications of it? We're going to start with what this is. And the best way to do this is by looking at an example. So this is Jason. I mentioned Jason before, but now you can actually see him, hopefully. Jason is a retail store manager. He earns $20 an hour and he works about a 10-hour shift. And he's in the store 5 days a week. So he works about a 50-hour week. Jason also lives 30 minutes from the store. He drives 30 minutes there and 30 minutes back. After work, he usually spends an hour de-stressing because, he has a long shift dealing with customers all day. And Jason also orders food instead of cooking dinner about 3 times a week. And that's ultimately because he's really tired from his job. So most people think that because Jason earns $20 an hour, his hourly wage is $20, and there's nothing else to it. But I want to challenge that assumption. An hourly wage, by definition, is a function of time and money, right? Jason makes $15 for every hour that he works. So let's look at the time and money related to Jason's job, right? So we know that he works 50 hours in the store and he earns about $1,000, right? And I got that $1,000 by just calculating his wage 10 hours a day for 5 days a week. Jason also spends 5 hours commuting each week, and he spends some money on gas, about $10. He also spends 5 hours de-stressing every week, right? An hour a day. And that doesn't cost him anything. It's just something that he does at home. And we also talked about how Jason orders food 3 nights a week, which actually saves him some time because he doesn't need to cook for those 3 meals. But it does cost him $30 each time, so about $90 for the week. So it turns out that Jason is actually spending 58 and a half hours a week related to his job instead of 50 hours. And he's walking away with $900, not 1,000. And so this means that while his paycheck is around $20 an hour, his real hourly wage is closer to $15 an hour. And I got this number by taking the money he walks away with, $900, and dividing that by the total time actually associated with this job. Now, to put this into perspective, if before Jason thought his annual income was around $50,000, and I got that by $20 an hour, right? If he works 50 weeks a year, that's around 50,000. His real annual income is actually closer to 37.5. That's 25% less than Jason thought he was making. And so Jason has learned an important lesson. There are time and money costs associated with his job that his paycheck doesn't account for. And that is ultimately the idea behind the real hourly wage, right? And so here's the definition. A real hourly wage is a more accurate way to evaluate your income that accounts for the time and money costs of maintaining your job. And the way to calculate it, we do what we just did with Jason, right? You take a certain time period. For Jason, that was a week. We take his earnings. We subtract from that any costs, any money costs related to his job. And then we divide that by the total time he has spent for his job. All right, let's pause for a second. Let's do a little pulse check. Does this make sense so far? I want you to put this in the chat again. 0 for no, 1 for sort of, 2 for yes. All right, we got twos, twos. All right, we got twos, so we're feeling good. Okay, great. Let's move on. We'll have a chance for some more specific questions later. All right, now let's talk about your own real hourly wage, right? Let's talk about some of the costs that maybe are associated with the job that you have today. So we're going to start with a little activity. I would love everyone to take a minute or two and brainstorm some ideas. So this is where we're going to take out that pen and paper that you pulled out, or the notes app or your computer, wherever you have notes. And I want you to write down some ideas for what are the hidden costs of your job. For Jason, right, one example was commuting, another example was eating out. But what are some ideas for your own job? Let's take a minute and then we'll check in. All right, let's take about 15 more seconds and then we'll check in. Alrighty. Thank you all for taking some time to do that. I would love it if maybe one or two people could share at least one of the costs, one of the ideas that they wrote down associated with their own job. Is anyone willing to share an idea? All right, John's put in the chat, cost of training and certifications to stay competitive. Great example. Stephanie's also put in the chat some stress, right, from Stephanie's job, and so she gets some massages to deal with it. Totally. That's another good example. Marketing materials and website. Absolutely. Another good one. Planning for meetings ahead of time, sending emails and texts. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we're spending time outside of the official job hours where we're getting paid so that we can perform better or right or be ready for our job. These are great examples. So thank you for sharing those. Let's look at some general categories of costs that might affect your real hourly wage, right? Um, we have transportation, right? And this was something that Jason deals with, right? Things like commuting time, gas money. If you're driving to work, maybe you have like car maintenance issues that you need to take care of. And also your car depreciates over time as you use it more, right? So that's part of it. There's appearance. You might spend time getting ready for work. Maybe you're replacing your work clothes every so often. Maybe you're grooming, like getting haircuts every month because you need to look professional, right? There are costs related to convenience. Jason had one of these, right? Things like eating out, grabbing coffee, or meal shortcuts. There's also household care. If you're working and can't do certain things around the home, or if you have dependents, then maybe you need to pay extra for daycare or after school care, or maybe you're just too tired to clean the house on the weekends, and so you hire a cleaning service to do it. There are also health costs, right? This is something that Stephanie mentioned, right? Stress, fatigue, and the costs that come with those. Like maybe, right, you take medication or you book a massage, right? Things like that. There's also coping costs, right? I know I've certainly had these where I come home from a stressful workday and I just spend a few hours on Netflix, right? And I kind of just want to escape into my TV show, right? Those are time costs as well. And this is not a comprehensive list, right? Avi and John mentioned some great career-related costs, right? And other types of costs in the chat. So now that you have an idea of some of the costs associated with your job, let's talk about how to calculate your own real hourly wage. And you can do the actual calculation later. Right now, I'm just going to walk through the steps. So to do this, look at a specific time period. It can be a week, a month, or quarter, a year, really whatever is easiest for you. First, we're going to calculate your nominal hourly wage. This is basically what your income looks like on an hourly basis without any of the costs, right? And if you're already an hourly worker, you can skip these steps. But if you have variable income or you're a salary worker, you can first identify your income for that time period, then identify the number of hours you worked, and then divide the income by the hours, right? That'll get you your nominal hourly wage. Then you can calculate your real hourly wage. And the way to do this is what we just talked about with Jason, right? You first identify the time and money costs associated with your job. We subtract the money costs from your income. We add the time cost to your hours worked. And then we divide the total money by the total time. That's your real hourly wage. Now, this sounds pretty complicated. And so I've created a handy calculator you can use. And it looks something like this. This is a website which you'll have access to once I share this deck later. And this website built by AI is something where you can input your income and the cost associated with your job, and then the calculator will just output your real hourly wage. So let's pause for a second. After you find out your real hourly wage, you might be thinking, I thought I'm making way less than I thought, right? And that's okay. It's okay to feel that way. A lot of people do. My goal with this presentation is not to depress you. It's to energize you to think differently. And this is actually an important reflection moment because your real hourly wage puts your job into perspective. When you look at your real hourly wage, there are several questions you can ask yourself. Does your real hourly wage surprise you? How does this change how you see your job? Do you feel like after looking at this number, you're still earning what you're worth? And is this job worth the time that you put into it? And this last question gets us something important. When you work a job, you're trading hours of your life for money, right? Jason from earlier works an hour and he makes $15. His real hourly wage, it represents this exchange between time and money. And we know that time is your most precious resource. Time is all we have, right, in this life. So it's important that your job and income are a fair trade for your time. So it turns out that time is money, though not in the way that we were taught. Okay, let's do another pulse check. what questions does the group have about how to calculate your own real hourly wage and maybe how to identify some of those costs? You can feel free to unmute if you have a question or throw it in the chat.
So I have a question,
Sure.
which is, what if you get personal satisfaction out of your work beyond your pay? Do you add that to your wage? How does that work?
That's a great question, Avi. Um, if you feel like you get personal satisfaction, then that's a wonderful thing. And that's actually something that will come into play a little bit more when we look at some of the practical implications. I wouldn't say that when it comes to calculating the hours, I don't think you need to translate some of the satisfaction into hours at this point. But I think it's an important note that you're making that, right? Hopefully you really enjoy your job, right? And in that case, the real hourly wage for you might not be so much about, I don't feel good about this. How do I change it? There's other ways you can leverage it, and that's what we're going to talk about kind of in the next section of this presentation. Yes, Andy.
I had, so back when I was working full time, and salary, I would always get frustrated because I would dream about work and something I was working on, or I'd lay awake late at night or early in the morning and solving problems. And I'm like, I need to count those as hours. You know what I mean? And that I feel like it's part of everything I do.
Totally. I think that's a really good point. And that's something I've certainly dealt with is sometimes in a negative way when I've had stressful jobs. It's just something I'm thinking about a lot. I've dreamt about it, sometimes nightmares, right? About a bad job. And I count those as hours, right? And it's sort of up to you to determine how many hours you want to count it as, right? If you're having bad dreams, up to you on whether or not you want to count the full 8 hours of sleep as as work. Maybe I wouldn't, but it's something to consider, right?
Yeah. Usually I was solving a problem is,
Right.
what I was doing. So wouldn't say
Right.
what there, but
Any other questions from the group? Again, feel free to unmute or put it in the chat.
How do you capture? So I get, I'll get a text, right? I work with students, so I'll get a text from a parent on my birthday while we're out to eat. And
Hmm.
then to me, it's like a long time my head is spinning. How do you capture the amount of time that is, I guess, impacting you? Or at what point do you say, get over your anxiety? This is not the job, this is you.
Yeah. I think that's a great question, Christy. I think there isn't a universal answer that's going to work for everyone. Um, some folks will maybe want to enumerate that, put a number on it, right? And maybe for you, maybe for other folks, it's too vague and it's too intangible. And so we're just gonna leave it out at the calculation, but we're gonna make a note that like, hey, this is something that is a cost to this job, right? And I think that's important too, is, and it's nice to be able to have a number represent all the costs associated with the job, but sometimes we can't do that because some costs it's just difficult, and that's okay. I think do what feels right to you, and just do your best with it is what I would say.
I think I have an issue, and I hope I'm not skipping ahead. I have an issue with the um, knowing what your time is worth, and it's because it's self-defined almost.
Hmm.
And if you were to try to take this to your employer asking for a promotion or a raise, and they ask the question, why is your time worth more than someone else's time? That's a hard argument of
Yeah,
how do I quantify that my time, the things I'm doing, is worth more than what you're willing to pay me for.
totally. I think that's a great question. Some of these reflection questions are internal, and some of them are kind of easier to extrapolate with a conversation into a conversation, maybe with an employer, right? Um, you know, do I feel like I'm doing something worth my time? How do I think about the worth of my time? The way I kind of approach that question is it's more of a self-reflection exercise. However, I think that there are practical implications when it comes to your job. Now, we will talk about some of this in a second, but one thing I'll say now is let's say you are reflecting on some of these questions and want to go to your boss and say, "Hey, I feel like I'd like to explore ways that we can, increase my compensation or my benefits or my salary or whatever." I think the answers that you have to some of these questions can be a solid foundation to go into that conversation. Because maybe you realize after doing this that you're actually putting in time on the weekend, or you're thinking about creative solutions like Andy's doing outside of the job. And then when you have a conversation with an employer, you can say, hey, these are other ways that I'm contributing that you may not be aware of, right, within like the strict job hours. So I think that's probably one way you can do it, Stephanie, but let's definitely talk about that more in a second. All right, I'm gonna go back here. This is the section, right, that some of you are definitely eager to get into, right? So you know your real hourly wage. So let's assume you have it, right? Now what? What can you do with this real hourly wage that you have? So in my mind, there are a few practical ways that you can use or leverage your real hourly wage in real life. The first is to compare jobs accurately, right? A lot of us, when we are comparing our job with another, or maybe we're in a job search and we're comparing multiple jobs, right? We'll look at a standard set of things, right? What's the pay? What are the benefits? What are the other details of the job? But now that we've looked at this real hourly wage concept, we know that it's possible that one job might technically pay more than the other, as in the paycheck is higher, but it could incur large time and money costs that leave you walking away with less. And so the point is that the most accurate way to compare the pay of two jobs is really to use the real hourly wage and not write what's written down on paper. So that's one use. Another use is you can think about how to improve your real hourly wage. And there's a few ways to do this. One of them is to increase your income. That's what Stephanie sort of just brought up, right? Using some of the things that you've reflected on about your job, or maybe just thinking about your contributions at work. You can go to your employer and negotiate for a higher salary. Maybe you look at changing jobs within the company. Maybe you think about other jobs where you feel like you're going to get more for your time. In addition to increasing your income, you can focus on the other side of the equation, which is reducing the time and money cost of your job. So, for instance, let's go back to Jason, right? Jason commutes about an hour a day. He's spending gas money, right? Maybe he realizes that his friend who also works in the store lives right next to him and they could carpool instead of driving separate. And maybe that doesn't save time, but maybe it saves some money, right? So there's ways that you can potentially reduce the cost of your job. The last use I want to mention here is you can use your real hourly wage to make spending decisions. And this is something I want to spend a little more time on. So we talked about earlier how every time you work, you trade hours of your life for money, right? In that sense, as we said, time is money. But we can also flip that idea. And here's what happens when we do that. Every time you spend money, you actually spend hours of your life. Now, to see this in practice, let's go back to the Jason example. So Jason's real hourly wage, right, as we calculated before, it's around $15 an hour. Let's say that Jason wants to buy a pair of the latest sneakers, which are around $150. Remember, he works in retail. As you can tell from this photo, he's very fashionable. So he's always looking out for the latest buy. Now, normally, when Jason is considering buying something, he asks himself, can I afford this? But there's a better way for him to think about this decision. So if Jason's real hourly wage is $15 an hour, then $150 sneakers takes 10 hours of work to pay for, right? Because he works 10 hours, and at the end of the 10 hours, in real terms, he's made $150. Now we can pay for the sneakers. Instead of asking, can I afford this pair of shoes? He can ask, is this purchase worth 10 hours of my life? Is it worth an extra day of work to pay for these shoes? And in this new mindset, Jason uses his real hourly wage to inform his spending, right? And he can do this with all types of purchases. I see some questions come through, and I'm going to answer those in a second. So we've looked at the $150 pair of sneakers, right? And that for Jason takes about a day because he makes $15 an hour. But let's say Jason wants to look at his Uber Eats order, right? When he orders Uber Eats, that's usually around $30. And with the real hourly wage concept, he realizes that it actually costs him 2 hours to pay for this Uber Eats. He's also planning a vacation, and this vacation is going to cost him $1,500, which in terms of his real hourly wage will cost him about 10 days of time. Now, Jason's looking at this and he's realizing, wait a second, my vacation is 7 days. Am I willing to work 10 days to pay for my 7 day vacation? Right? And ultimately, he can ask himself if these expenses are aligned with his time and energy. And so in all this, Jason has learned another important lesson, which is that every purchase has a time cost, and spending money is really spending time. And so here's how to use your own real hourly wage to make spending decisions, just like Jason did. Right, first you divide the cost of the purchase by your real hourly wage. That's what we did with his $150 pair of sneakers. We divided that by $15 and we got 10 hours, right? That's how much time it'll cost you. And then you can reflect. Is this worth that many hours of my life? Am I willing to work an extra X hours next week to pay for this item now? And this can be a really powerful way to make sure that your expenses are aligned with your time and your values. All right, let's do another pulse check. What questions does the group have about the practical uses of your real hourly wage? And also let me know if you can't see the slide where I have this question on it. I want to make sure that's still working.
It's still working.
Okay, great.
So I guess my question about this is, would you have anything better to do with your time? You know,
Yeah,
it's opportunity
opportunity
cost.
cost.
Mhm.
That's a huge one, right? That's a whole separate cost category on its own. And that's a great question, Avi. I think that's a critical reflection question to add, right, to some of the ones that we've talked about, right? What else could you be doing with your time if it wasn't this, right? Great question.
And
Great comment.
my thought that I had was, is this after taxes?
Did too. I was wondering that.
Also, good question. And the response is you can do this either way. And I think the reason you can do it either way is because part of a lot of the power of this exercise is just in the fact that you're doing the exercise
Awareness.
and that you're reflecting on some of the numbers, right? And so I personally like to do this after tax because when I use my real hourly wage to make a spending decision, it feels a little bit more like it's in real money terms, like what's actually in my account as it sits today. But so that's a good question. And if you're gonna pick one way or the other, I would do your like take home pay. But theoretically, you can get the impact of the exercise either way.
I use this to stop filling out surveys. I used to do these surveys and it would be like a half-hour long survey and you get $3 or something. I was like, wait a minute. My time is worth more than this. So I stopped doing it.
Totally. Thanks for sharing, Christy. That's a great example. Okay, let's move on. All right, we're almost done here. This is the summary section. Let's wrap it up. All right, what did we learn? Today we answered 3 questions. What is a real hourly wage? We defined it as a more accurate way to assess your income that accounts for the time and money costs of maintaining your job. What's your own real hourly wage, right? We brainstormed some of the hidden costs of your job. Hopefully you have a little bit of a list now. And we talked about how to calculate your own. And the third question we answered was, what can you do about it, right? We talked about different ways you can use and leverage these ideas in real life. So we covered a lot of material. And with that in mind, I've identified 3 simple steps you can take after today to put this into practice. Step 1 is calculate your real hourly wage. I'm going to send this deck after this presentation. The link here under calculate will point you to this website I built, where in just a few minutes, you can calculate your real hourly wage. Step 2 is reflect on it, right? Ask some of these questions that we've talked about as a group. Step 3 is make one decision with your real hourly wage. It could be job related. Maybe you're looking at your costs and you say, hey, you know what? I want to reduce that time or that money cost. Or maybe it's a spending decision, right? Next time you're going out to eat, you can think about the cost of the meal in terms of the time that it'll actually take you to pay for it. To close, I want to leave you with a few final thoughts. Your life is made up of hours. Your job is how you spend a large portion of them. So your job is not just about how much money you make. It's about what your hours are worth and whether you're happy with how you spend them. My hope is that these ideas energize you to think differently and make thoughtful choices. So thank you. Thank you all for listening and for engaging with me today. Appreciate all the unmuting and comments in the chat. Again, I'm going to send this out, but if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you can scan this QR code, and you can also scan the second QR code to access the real hourly wage calculator that I built.